She just tore my dress in front of everyone. The sound of ripping fabric echoed in my ears as the reception hall fell silent. Felicity's laughter, which had been flowing freely with champagne all evening, cut off abruptly as she realized what she'd done, or perhaps as she registered the collective intake of breath from the guests surrounding us. She didn't realize that what I saw about to do will ruin her wedding and her life forever. "Oh my God," she said, her manicured hand flying to her mouth in what might have passed for genuine shock if I hadn't caught the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. "Nora, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. It's just that this homemade dress is so delicate. I guess that's what happens when you use scraps instead of real fabric." She turned to her bridesmaids, stage whispering loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I told Gavin we should have helped her buy something appropriate. I mean, who wears homemade to their son's wedding? It looks like something from a thrift shop." The way she emphasized homemade made it sound like a disease, her voice dripping with the same disdain she'd shown when she'd first seen my cottage, my garden, my life. I stood perfectly still as cool air touched the newly exposed skin at my waist, where the ivory lace, salvaged from my late husband James's christening gown, had torn away from the bodice. 3 months of careful stitching by hand, of squinting in the evening light of my sewing room, of whispering to James's memory as I worked, all undone with a single deliberate tug. "It's quite all right, dear," I heard myself say. My seamstress's training, always be gracious, always maintain composure, taking over while my heart contracted painfully in my chest. These things happen. "God, it's practically falling apart," Felicity continued, fingering the torn lace with exaggerated care. Is this from an old baby blanket or something?" She laughed, high and brittle. "How quaint. No wonder it couldn't withstand a simple photo session." Several of her college friends tittered behind their champagne flutes. One whispered something that made Felicity snort with laughter. The photographer, Tyler, lowered his camera. His eyes met mine with quiet sympathy, a witness to what we both knew wasn't an accident. I glanced across the reception hall at my son, Gavin, who stood frozen near the wedding cake, champagne flute halfway to his lips. I waited, 1 heartbeat, 2, 3, for him to come to my defense, to cross the room and put his arm around me, as he had so many times when he was young, and I was his entire world. He didn't move. "Gavin, sweetie," Felicity called out, her voice honeyed but loud enough to carry. "Your mom's had a little wardrobe malfunction. Maybe you could find her somewhere to, I don't know, change into something less distracting." Susan Chambers, Felicity's mother, glided forward instead, her designer dress whispering against the parquet floor like expensive secrets. "Let's get you to the ladies' room," she offered, her voice honey-coated condescension. "I'm sure we can pin that creation back together, at least until the important photos are done. Though perhaps it's for the best if you skip the formal portraits. We want everything to look cohesive. Important photos. As if I wasn't important. As if I hadn't written checks for the photographer's deposit. For the open bar that was fueling Felicity's cruelty. For the quartet playing Vivaldi in the corner. As if I hadn't spent 40 years raising the groom, standing silently across the room. "That won't be necessary," I said quietly, reaching for my small beaded purse. Another creation of mine, though no one had noticed. I think I'll head home now. "Mom." Gavin finally found his voice, taking a hesitant step forward. Too little, too late. Enjoy your evening, sweetheart," I told him with a smile that cost me everything to maintain. "It's a beautiful wedding." It was. The Wallace estate glowed with thousands of fairy lights I'd helped hang last weekend. The centerpieces featured local wildflowers I'd suggested when the florist quoted a price that made even Felicity blanch. The cake topper was hand-painted by an artist friend who gave me a discount as a favor. All these little touches that had made Felicity's dream wedding possible while staying almost within their budget. Almost. Because I'd quietly covered the difference each time they went over. "You can't leave now," Felicity protested, her composure returning as she sensed the danger of a scene. "We haven't even cut the cake. Everyone's expecting the mother of the groom to be here, even if you're... well..." She gestured vaguely at my dress, at me, at everything I represented that didn't fit into her curated celebration. "People will talk if you rush out like some wounded bird," she added, lowering her voice to a hiss only I could hear. Though, honestly, that outfit was making people talk already. Did you really think you could sew something appropriate for an event like this? With your... limitations? Her eyes flicked dismissively to my hands, with their slightly swollen joints, the arthritis that had ended my career, now weaponized as another flaw. "I've had quite enough sweetness for one evening," I replied, gathering my torn dress carefully around me. "And I believe I've contributed enough to this celebration to leave whenever I choose." To my right, I caught a glimpse of my oldest friend Marta, half rising from her seat with murder in her eyes. I gave her the slightest shake of my head. Not now. Not here. I made my way across the reception hall with measured steps, the room parting before me like water. I felt eyes on my back, heard the murmurs begin as I reached the grand double doors. I didn't look back, not at Gavin, not at Felicity, not at the elaborate celebration I'd helped create. Outside, the June evening embraced me with unexpected kindness. Warm air scented with roses from the Wallace estate gardens. My 2008 Corolla waited faithfully in the lot, surrounded by gleaming SUVs and European sedans. I slid behind the wheel, my hands steady as I turned the key. It wasn't until I was halfway home to my small cottage on Maple Street, with its overflowing garden and creaking front porch swing, that I allowed the first tear to fall. Just one. For James, who would have never stood silent. For Gavin, who had. For the lace that had survived 6 decades only to be destroyed in a moment of casual cruelty. The cottage welcomed me home, dark but familiar. I moved through the rooms without turning on lights, my fingers trailing over surfaces I knew by heart. The buffet James had built when we were first married, the quilt my mother had made for Gavin's birth, the worn leather chair where I'd nursed my son through countless ear infections and bad dreams. In the bathroom, I carefully removed what remained of my dress. The tear was substantial, from waist to hip, revealing the simple slip beneath. A clean, deliberate pull, not the accidental snag Felicity had claimed. I placed it on my sewing table for later examination, though I already knew it couldn't be invisibly mended. Some damage can't be undone, only incorporated into a new design. I changed into my nightgown and robe, made a cup of chamomile tea, and sat at my kitchen table. The old-fashioned wall phone, the one Gavin always teased me about keeping, hung silent on the wall. No calls from my son checking if I'd arrived home safely. No worried voice messages. Just the ticking of the clock James had restored 30 years ago, and the distant sound of summer crickets. The kitchen calendar caught my eye, a free one from the local credit union, marked with neat notations in my precise handwriting. June 15th, final payment to Wallace Estate, for $200. June 17th, Remainder to caterer, $2,300. June 18th. Honeymoon. Deposit confirmation, June 20th. Felicity's dress preservation appointment, $850. All scheduled for the coming week. All in my name. Not because I'd insisted, but because Felicity and Gavin had asked. Their own credit extended to the breaking point by the ever-expanding scope of this simple, elegant wedding that had somehow ballooned into a 3-day extravaganza. I ran my finger over these notations, feeling something crystallize within me. Not anger exactly, but a clarity I hadn't allowed myself in years, perhaps ever. Since James's death 12 years ago, I'd poured everything into Gavin. My love, my savings, my silent support. I'd welcomed Felicity into our small family, despite her barely concealed disdain for my modest home and handmade clothes. I'd offered help with wedding planning, only to be sidelined and then called upon when bills came due. I'd endured Susan Chambers' pointed comments about my quaint lifestyle and simple tastes. I'd accepted being seated at a back table at my own son's rehearsal dinner, far from the wedding party, all because I loved Gavin, all because I thought love meant eternal, uncomplaining sacrifice. But tonight, as the lace from James's christening gown lay torn on my sewing table, something else my late husband used to say came back to me. Being a doormat isn't kindness, Nora girl. It's just training people to wipe their feet on you. The kitchen phone rang suddenly, startling me. I checked the clock. 11:42 p.m. The wedding reception would be winding down now. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Mom? Gavin's voice, slightly slurred from champagne. Are you okay? Why did you leave? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of all I wanted to say pressing against my chest. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Felicity feels terrible about your dress. It was an accident. He repeated the lie she'd no doubt instructed him to tell, the one he perhaps needed to believe. Of course, I said softly. You'll be at brunch tomorrow, right? At the Chambers Country Club? Felicity's parents are expecting everyone at 11. The brunch I wasn't originally invited to until I mentioned I'd be handling the payment. The brunch where I'd likely be seated at a distant table again, like an obligation, rather than the mother of the groom. We'll see, I said, non-committal. Give my best to your bride. After hanging up, I moved to my small home office, once Gavin's bedroom, and opened the file drawer. Inside, meticulously organized, were folders containing every financial contribution I'd made to this wedding. Deposit receipts, payment confirmations, contracts with my signature. Not flaunted, but not hidden either. Simply kept with the precision that had made me the most sought-after seamstress in Auburn Falls before arthritis forced my retirement. I spread these papers on the desk, moonlight spilling through the window illuminating the numbers, far larger than I'd allowed myself to acknowledge. Nearly half of my modest savings, given freely because I wanted Gavin to have the celebration he deserved, because I thought my contribution mattered, even if it wasn't recognized. But tonight had shown me the truth. In their eyes, I was as disposable as my handmade dress, a background element to be tolerated, then discarded when inconvenient. A soft knock at my front door interrupted my thoughts. I tightened my robe and went to answer, expecting perhaps Marta, who had texted that she was leaving the reception early as well. Instead, Tyler, the wedding photographer, stood on my porch, looking uncomfortable in his formal wear. Mrs. Delaney, he said, I hope it's not too late. He held out a portfolio case. I have something for you. Surprised, I invited him in. In my small living room, he carefully opened the case and removed several photographs. Printed on the spot, he explained, at the small portable printer he kept in his car for certain special shots. "I wanted you to have these," he said quietly. The first showed me helping Gavin straighten his tie before the ceremony, both of us laughing at his perpetual inability to get it right. The second captured me watching from the back of the church as he saw Felicity for the first time, my face a study in quiet joy. The third showed me dancing with my son, early in the reception, before Felicity's champagne-fueled comments began. "These aren't part of what they paid for," Tyler explained. "These are just... I thought you should have them. And this..." He hesitated, then showed me the final image. A perfectly timed shot of Felicity's hand, grasping my dress, her face caught in an expression not of surprise, but of deliberate malice. "I never deliver these kinds of shots to clients," he said softly. "But I wanted you to know. Someone saw what happened. Really saw." I touched the photograph gently, this evidence that I hadn't imagined the intent behind the moment. "Thank you," I whispered. After Tyler left, I returned to my desk and added his photographs to the pile of documents. Then I reached for my checkbook and a sheet of my personal stationery. Cream-colored paper with a simple ND monogram that James had given me for our 25th anniversary. With the same careful precision I once used to create wedding gowns for other women's happy days, I began to write. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but with the quiet dignity that had seen me through 40 years of both joy and sorrow. By morning, the wedding that had seemed so perfect would begin to unravel, thread by careful thread. Not because I sought to destroy, but because it was time, at last, to stitch together a new pattern for myself. One where kindness did not equal erasure. One where love did not mean accepting contempt. One where this seamstress, after a lifetime of mending others' tears, finally tended to her own. With the same careful precision I once used to create wedding gowns for other women's happy days, I began to write, not in anger, not in vengeance, but with the quiet dignity that had seen me through 40 years of both joy and sorrow. I drafted 3 letters, the first to the Wallace estate. "Dear Mr. Harrington, I regret to inform you that I will not be processing the final payment of $4,200 for my son's wedding reception as previously arranged. As the contract is in my name, I am exercising my right to terminate the agreement. Please direct any further communication regarding this matter to me, rather than to the newlyweds. Sincerely, Nora Delaney." The second to Bellissimo Catering. "Dear Ms. Rossi, I am writing to cancel the remaining payment of $2,300 for catering services provided at the Delaney Chambers wedding. As the contracting party, I am withdrawing my financial support. Please consider our business concluded. Respectfully, Nora Delaney, the third to Blue Horizon Travel, regarding the honeymoon package to the Amalfi Coast, to whom it may concern. Please cancel the honeymoon arrangements for Gavin and Felicity Delaney scheduled for June 18th. As I am the account holder who placed the deposit, I will not be completing payment for this package. Please refund any refundable portion of the deposit to my original payment method. Thank you, Nora Delaney." Each letter was measured, polite, and utterly final. No explanations, no emotional appeals, just the simple withdrawal of financial support that had been taken for granted. I sealed the envelopes, applied stamps, and set them by the door to mail first thing in the morning. Then I opened my laptop, the modest Dell that Gavin had insisted needed replacing, though it served me perfectly well, and composed similar emails to the remaining vendors, the florist, the string quartet, and most satisfyingly, Le Couture Preservation, where Felicity had booked the most expensive package to preserve her designer wedding gown. As I worked, a peculiar calm settled over me. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation, taking back not just my money, but my dignity, my right to be treated as more than a convenient ATM or an embarrassing obligation. I was finishing the last email when my phone buzzed with a text from Marta. "You okay?" I wanted to punch that spoiled princess right in her veneers. "Call me when you're up." I smiled, imagining Marta's righteous fury. In 40 years of friendship, she had always been my fierce defender, the one urging me to stand up for myself when I preferred keeping the peace. "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. Having tea and making plans. We'll call tomorrow." There was something soothing about the quiet house, the scratch of my pen on paper, the decisive clicks of keyboard keys. I had spent my life creating. Beautiful garments, a warm home, a loving son. Now I was creating something new. Boundaries. The kitchen clock chimed 1 a.m., just as I closed my laptop. I should have been exhausted, but energy hummed through me, a current of certainty I hadn't felt since James died. I was reminded of the times I'd stayed up all night to finish a rush bridal commission, my hands moving steadily through delicate beadwork, while the rest of the town slept, the same focus, the same clarity of purpose. Only this time I wasn't stitching someone else's dream. I was unpicking the false one I'd been living in. I slept deeply for the first time in months, without the wedding anxieties that had plagued me since Gavin and Felicity announced their engagement. No worries about whether the payments would clear, whether Felicity would find my contributions adequate, whether I would somehow embarrass my son by being too plain, too simple, too much myself. Morning arrived with golden June sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. I stretched, feeling oddly light despite the events of the previous night. Or perhaps because of them. The torn dress still lay on my sewing table, a problem for another day. Today had other work to be done. I dressed in a simple cotton shift, another of my creations, though Felicity would no doubt find it quaint, and made coffee. The kitchen calendar with its neat financial notations now looked like a map of landmines I had narrowly avoided stepping on. All those payments, all that money I would have continued pouring into an event that had already shown me my true place in my son's new life. As I sipped my coffee on the front porch, breathing in the scent of the climbing roses James had planted the year before he died, I heard the distinctive rumble of Marta's ancient Jeep coming up the street. She appeared a moment later, bearing a bakery box and an expression of fierce determination. "I brought reinforcements," she announced, setting down a box of almond croissants from Bergman's Bakery. "And I want every detail. Don't leave out a single word of what that entitled little witch said to you." I patted the porch swing beside me. "It's done, Marta. I've already handled it." "Handled what?" She eyed me suspiciously as she sat down. "If you tell me you're planning to apologize to her for leaving early, I swear I'm canceling all the remaining payments," I said quietly. "Everything. The venue balance, the catering remainder, the honeymoon deposit, Felicity's precious dress preservation. All of it." Marta's mouth fell open, then curved into a delighted grin. "Well, look who finally found the steel in her spine. Nora Delaney, I have waited 30 years to see this." "It felt like time," I said simply. "Time. It's about a decade overdue. Ever since that girl came into Gavin's life, she's treated you like something she scraped off her designer heel. And Gavin just lets it happen?" Marta's indignation had been building for the 2 years of Gavin and Felicity's relationship. "Remember Christmas, when she accidentally left you off the dinner invitation, and then acted surprised when you showed up. I did remember. Just as I remembered being seated in the back corner at the engagement party, and Felicity's constant little remarks about my simple home and practical clothes, a pattern I had excused each time for Gavin's sake. "Last night was different," I said finally. "It wasn't just Felicity being Felicity. It was deliberate, public, and Gavin just stood there. And then let me guess, he called later with some excuse about how it was all an accident." Marta knew my son almost as well as I did. Right on cue. I sighed. "I raised him better than this, Marta. I know I did." "You did. But he's a grown man now, making his own choices. Bad ones, clearly, but his own." She bit into a croissant, scattering flakes across her lap. "So when do they find out about the financial reckoning?" "Soon. The letters go out today. The emails went last night." Marta's eyebrows shot up. "You've already done it? No hesitation? No second thoughts? Who are you, and what have you done with my conflict-avoiding friend?" I smiled, watching a hummingbird dart among the porch flowers. "Something changed last night. When that dress tore, the lace from James's christening gown, it was like something else tore loose inside me, too. The last thread of your patience, I hope." Maybe. I considered trying to articulate the shift. Or maybe it was the illusion that if I just gave enough, money, time, space, pride, I'd eventually be good enough for them. Marta made a disgusted sound. "Good enough for them? Nora, you're worth 10 of Felicity and her whole snooty family combined." "Thank you for always believing that," I said, squeezing her hand. Even when I didn't. We sat in companionable silence, finishing our coffee while the morning brightened around us. Down the street, Mrs. Peterson walked her corgi. Across the way, the Henderson children set up a lemonade stand, their shrill voices carrying on the summer air. My quiet neighborhood, my modest life. Not grand enough for the Chambers family, perhaps, but mine and precious in its own way. "So what now?" Marta asked finally. "You know they'll be coming here the minute they realize what's happening." "I know." I had rehearsed this moment in my mind while falling asleep. "And I'll be ready." "Want me to be here?" I'd pay good money to see Felicity's face when she realizes her fairy tale just hit a budget cut. I considered the offer. Marta's fierce support was always a comfort, but this confrontation needed to be mine alone. "I'll handle it, but maybe come by later, for moral support after the storm. Count on it, with wine." She stood, brushing pastry crumbs from her pants. "I'm proud of you, Nora. It's about damn time you stopped being everyone's doormat." After Marta left, I walked to the end of my driveway and placed the 3 letters in my mailbox, raising the flag with a strange sense of finality. Then I spent the morning in my garden, weeding and deadheading roses with the same careful attention I'd once given to hemming wedding veils. The physical work felt good, purposeful, tangible. I was so absorbed that I didn't hear the car until it was in my driveway, a silver BMW with diplomatic level tint on the windows. The driver's door opened, and Gavin emerged, looking rumpled and slightly miserable in yesterday's dress shirt, now wrinkled from sleep. "Mom," he called, crossing the lawn toward me. "We need to talk." I straightened slowly, mindful of my knees, and removed my gardening gloves. "Good morning, Gavin. No brunch at the country club?" He had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "We're running late. Felicity's getting ready now. But I wanted to check on you first. You seemed upset last night." Seemed upset, as if my feelings were a misperception rather than a natural response to humiliation. I left because I was unwelcome, I said simply. It seemed the dignified choice. Unwelcome? Mom, that's not true. It was just a misunderstanding with the dress. Felicity feels terrible about it. Does she? I asked mildly, watching his face for signs of the little boy who once couldn't lie to me about sneaking cookies before dinner. Is that why you're here at... I glanced at my watch. 10:15, when brunch starts at 11? To convey her deep remorse. He shifted uncomfortably. Well, there's that, but also... something weird is happening. The venue called this morning. They said you canceled the final payment, and something about the honeymoon, too. So it begins, I thought, sooner than I'd expected. Nothing weird at all, I replied calmly. I've decided not to make those payments. Gavin stared at me as if I'd started speaking in tongues. You've... what? Mom, those are contracted payments. They're expecting the money. I'm aware. I'm the one who signed the contracts, after all. But we're counting on you for those. His voice rose slightly. We budgeted everything based on your contribution. I looked at my son, the worried crease between his brows, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the slight loosening around his collar where he'd tugged at it in stress. My boy, now a man, who had stood silently while his wife humiliated his mother. Tell me, Gavin, I asked softly, what exactly did Felicity say about my dress after I left last night? The question hung between us in the warm June air. My son's face cycled through a series of expressions, surprise, discomfort, calculation, before settling on something that resembled forced confusion. About your dress? Nothing, really. Everyone was just concerned that you left so suddenly. The lie landed between us like a poorly placed stitch. Obvious. Jarring. In my years of sewing, I'd learned that invisible mending requires perfect honesty about the damage. You can't repair what you pretend isn't torn. I see, I said quietly. And what about this morning? When the venue called about the payment? What did Felicity say then? Gavin's gaze slid away from mine, focusing on the rosebush beside us. She was worried, of course, confused. We both were. Are. Mom, what's going on? This isn't like you. What's going on? I said, removing my gardening apron and folding it neatly over my arm. Is that I've decided not to continue financing a celebration where I'm treated as an embarrassment. What? No one thinks... Gavin. I cut him off gently but firmly. Please don't add more lies to the pile. It does neither of us any credit. I gestured toward the porch. Let's sit down. Would you like some coffee? He followed me, bewilderment etched across his features. I'd never spoken to him this way. Direct, unyielding. For most of his life, I'd been the mother who smoothed things over, who found the middle path, who sacrificed her own needs for harmony. The woman who took a seat at the back of the room, without complaint. On the porch, I poured him coffee from the carafe I'd brought out earlier for Marta. He took it automatically, still looking like he'd wandered into someone else's conversation. Mom, we need those payments completed. Today. The venue is threatening to report us to credit agencies. The honeymoon is next week. Those are indeed challenging circumstances, I agreed, sipping my own coffee. What do you plan to do about them? He stared at me as if I'd suggested he grow wings and fly. Do! Mom, you need to reinstate the payments. You promised to cover these costs. We've been planning for months with that understanding. Yes, I did promise. And do you know what you promised, Gavin? The day you asked me to help with the wedding costs. I set my cup down carefully. You promised I would be treated with respect, that I would be included as the mother of the groom should be. His face flushed. "You have been included. You were at everything. The rehearsal dinner, the ceremony, the reception. Seated at the back, or at a side table, or, most recently, humiliated in front of every guest when Felicity deliberately tore my dress and then mocked it. Mocked me. It wasn't deliberate," he insisted, but his eyes shifted away again. "It was an accident in the middle of photos, and she apologized." I reached beside me where I'd placed Tyler's photograph, the one showing Felicity's hand grasping my dress, her face a mask of calculated malice. "This doesn't look like an accident to me," I said, sliding it across the small table between us. And her comments afterwards weren't an apology. They were a continuation of the public humiliation she began the moment she decided my handmade dress didn't belong in her perfect wedding pictures. Gavin stared at the photograph, his throat working as he swallowed. "Where did you get this?" "Tyler brought it to me last night. He wanted me to know someone saw what really happened." "Tyler shouldn't have..." "Shouldn't have what? Documented the truth? Being kind to your mother when you couldn't manage it?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, honed by a night of clarity. "I waited for you, Gavin. 3 heartbeats. That's how long I stood there, hoping my son would cross the room and stand beside his mother." His shoulders slumped. "I didn't know what to do. It all happened so fast, and Felicity had been drinking, and her parents were watching. So you chose the path of least resistance," I finished for him, "as you've been doing since you met her." "That's not fair." "Perhaps not," I conceded, "but neither is expecting me to keep financing a relationship where I'm treated as an inconvenience at best and an object of mockery at worst." His phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at it, his expression tightening. "It's Felicity. She's wondering where I am. The brunch... ... "Go," I said simply. "Your wife is waiting." He looked at me with something like panic. "Mom, I can't leave things like this. The payments are not happening," I finished firmly. "At least not from me." "But the honeymoon is next week. The venue balance is due today. We don't have that kind of money just sitting around." "I understand it's a difficult position," I said, and genuinely meant it. "But perhaps this is an opportunity to start your marriage on honest footing, living within your means, rather than beyond them at my expense." His phone buzzed again, more urgently. He answered with a terse, "Yes, I'm coming." "Just give me a few more minutes." After hanging up, he looked at me with the expression of a drowning man. "Mom, please. I'm begging you. We can talk about all this later, work through the hurt feelings. But right now we need those payments processed. Today." "Hurt feelings," I repeated softly. The minimizing phrase landed like a slap. "Is that what you think this is about? Hurt feelings?" "I know Felicity can be difficult sometimes, and what happened with your dress was unfortunate, but..." "Unfortunate is a rainstorm on your wedding day, Gavin. What happened last night was deliberate cruelty, and your silence made you complicit in it." His face hardened suddenly. "So this is punishment? Making us scramble for thousands of dollars we don't have because you're upset about a torn dress?" "No," I said, my voice steady despite the pain his words caused. "This is me refusing to continue enabling behavior that diminishes me. It's not punishment. It's self-preservation." "Felicity will be furious," he said, more to himself than to me. "I imagine she will, but that's between you and your wife." I gathered our empty cups. "You should go. You're late for brunch." He stood, running a hand through his hair in the same gesture he'd had since childhood, when confronted with a problem he couldn't charm his way out of. "This isn't over, Mom. We'll figure something out for today, but we need to talk about this. Really talk." "I'm always open to real conversation," I said, emphasizing the word he'd skimmed over. "But it needs to include real acknowledgement of what happened and what it represents." As he turned to leave, uncertainty replaced the frustration on his face. For a moment, I glimpsed the little boy who'd looked to me for guidance, for comfort, for the boundaries that made him feel secure, even when he pushed against them. "I do love you, Mom," he said quietly, "even if I haven't shown it well lately." "I know," I replied, "because despite everything I did, I love you too. Enough to believe you're capable of being better than this." His car disappeared down the street, leaving me alone on the porch with the scent of roses and the strange lightness that comes from speaking unvarnished truth after years of careful, pleasant evasions. I knew the conversation with Gavin was only the opening skirmish. The real battle would come when Felicity realized the extent of what I'd done. The cancelled payments, the withdrawn support, the unraveling of her perfect wedding weekend. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the conflict. There was a peculiar freedom in having nothing left to lose. Inside, I washed our coffee cups and considered what to do with the day stretching before me. My calendar would normally have been filled with wedding-related tasks, confirming payments, arranging final details, preparing for the post-wedding brunch I was no longer invited to attend. Instead, I had a day that belonged entirely to me. I decided to call Ruth, an old friend from my seamstress days who'd been asking me to join her quilting circle for months. I'd always declined, worried that Felicity or Gavin might need me for some wedding emergency. The thought made me smile now, a rueful acknowledgement of how I'd arranged my life around their convenience. Before I could reach for the phone, however, the sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. I glanced out the window to see a gleaming white Range Rover pulling into my driveway at an angle that suggested haste and temper. Even through the tinted windows, I recognized Susan Chambers' perfect blonde coif in the passenger seat, and behind the wheel, her face already set in lines of fury, was Felicity. The real confrontation had arrived sooner than I'd expected. I straightened my shoulders and smoothed my simple cotton dress. A lifetime of making wedding gowns had taught me that elegant simplicity outlasts flashy trends. A lifetime of raising a son alone had taught me that love doesn't require a doormat. And last night had taught me that some fabric, once torn, reveals a new pattern altogether. I opened my front door and stepped onto the porch to meet whatever came next. Felicity emerged from the Range Rover like a storm front, designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the shade of my maple tree. Her white sundress, likely chosen for the country club brunch, looked incongruously festive against her thunderous expression. Susan followed more deliberately, her calculating gaze taking in my modest home, as if assessing its resale potential and finding it wanting. "What do you think you're doing?" Felicity demanded without preamble, storming up my walkway. No greeting, no pretense of civility. "Good morning, Felicity. Susan." I nodded to each of them, my hands clasped loosely before me. "I assume Gavin has spoken with you." "Barely. He called in a panic about the venue payment, then disappeared to come here, and now he's not answering his phone." Felicity reached the bottom of my porch steps, looking up at me with undisguised fury. "The venue manager is threatening to cancel our day after brunch if the final payment isn't made by noon. That's in..." She checked her watch, an ostentatious diamond-encrusted thing. 90 minutes. "That is a tight deadline," I agreed mildly. "Are you enjoying this?" she hissed, taking another step up. "Is this your idea of payback? Because you got your feelings hurt last night?" Susan moved to stand beside her daughter, her expression a carefully composed mask of concerned disapproval. "Nora, dear, I understand you might be feeling a bit overlooked in all the excitement. It happens with mothers of the groom sometimes. But surely you don't want to spoil Gavin and Felicity's special celebration over a simple misunderstanding." A simple misunderstanding. The same dismissive framing Gavin had attempted, now deployed with Susan's practiced condescension. "There was no misunderstanding," I said quietly. "Your daughter deliberately tore my dress and then publicly mocked me for it." "That's absurd," Susan scoffed. "Felicity would never—" "I have a photograph," I interrupted, something I rarely did but found strangely satisfying. The wedding photographer captured the moment quite clearly. Your hand. I looked directly at Felicity, grasping my dress with an expression that can only be described as deliberate. Felicity's composure faltered momentarily before she rallied. "A photograph can capture a millisecond out of context. I was trying to help you with your dress and it tore because... Let's be honest, Nora. It wasn't exactly made of quality materials. The jab was meant to wound, to redirect from her culpability to my inadequacy. 6 months ago, it might have worked, but not today. The lace was from my husband's christening gown," I said simply. "Irreplaceable. And your comments afterwards made your intentions quite clear." "Oh my God, are you seriously going to ruin a $30,000 wedding weekend over an old piece of fabric? Grow up." Felicity's voice rose, echoing across my quiet front yard. Mrs. Peterson, walking her corgi again, slowed to watch the spectacle. "I'm not ruining anything," I replied evenly. "I'm simply declining to pay for it. There's a difference." "You promised!" Felicity stomped her foot, actually stomped it, like a child denied a toy. "We signed contracts based on your commitment." "I committed to helping with a reasonable wedding for my son. What you created was a 3-day extravaganza far beyond what anyone needs or can afford. And yes, I agreed to help because I wanted Gavin to be happy. But I did not agree to be treated like an embarrassment while funding your social aspirations." Susan stepped forward, taking a more strategic approach. "Nora, we all say things we don't mean when we're tired or stressed. Wedding planning is exhausting, as you know from your previous work." She emphasized the last words as if my career had been collecting garbage rather than creating works of art. "If Felicity said anything that upset you, I'm sure she's deeply sorry. Aren't you, darling?" Felicity's face suggested she'd rather eat glass than apologize, but she managed a tight, "Of course. If I said anything insensitive, I apologize." The non-apology hung in the air between us, hollow, formulaic, devoid of acknowledgement or genuine remorse. "Thank you for that," I said, not accepting but acknowledging the gesture. "But my decision remains the same. I will not be processing any further payments." "You can't do this!" Felicity's voice cracked with genuine panic now. "The honeymoon is next week. The brunch is tomorrow. My dress preservation appointment is scheduled. Do you have any idea how long the waiting list is for their premium package?" "I'm aware of all the scheduled commitments," I said calmly. "I made them." "Then honor them," she demanded. "As you honored me last night?" I asked softly. "As you've honored me throughout this entire process, seating me at the back of the rehearsal dinner, excluding me from dress shopping, mocking my home, my clothes, my very existence whenever you thought I couldn't hear?" Felicity's face flushed, either with shame or rage. It was difficult to tell. That's not... I never... You did. I interrupted gently, consistently, and Gavin allowed it. That was our dynamic, established over 2 years. I would give, you would take, and my dignity was the price of admission. Susan stepped between us, her smile sharp as shears. This is all very dramatic, Nora, but let's be practical. These vendors need to be paid today. Surely we can address any hurt feelings after the wedding festivities are complete. There it was again. Hurt feelings. As if my reaction was the problem, rather than the behavior that caused it. The time for addressing this was last night, I said, when Felicity tore my dress. Or perhaps before that, when she decided I wasn't worthy of basic respect, despite financing her dream wedding. But certainly before this morning, when neither of you thought to check if I was all right, until the money stopped flowing. So what do you want? Felicity demanded. An official apology. Fine, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I hurt your precious feelings. There. Is that good enough for you to release the payments now? I regarded her carefully. This young woman my son had chosen. This person who viewed apologies as currency, rather than genuine expressions of remorse. No, I said simply. It isn't. Susan's strategic smile vanished. Now you're just being vindictive. Actually, I'm being honest. Perhaps for the first time in my relationship with your family. I took a breath, centering myself. The payments are cancelled. The contracts will need to be renegotiated between you and the vendors, or paid from your own accounts. My financial involvement in this wedding is concluded. Felicity's face contorted with a rage that reminded me, absurdly, of her expression when the florist had explained that peonies weren't in season for a June wedding. You will regret this, she hissed, jabbing a manicured finger toward me. I swear to God, you'll never see Gavin again if you do this to us. I'll make sure of it. The threat should have devastated me. 2 days ago, it would have. But something had shifted when that dress tore. Something fundamental in how I valued myself versus how desperately I sought to maintain relationships at any cost. That would be Gavin's choice, I said quietly. And a painful one. But I've lived through painful choices before. What I won't live through anymore is being treated as less than I am. Susan grabbed her daughter's arm, clearly sensing that threats would get them nowhere. Come on, Felicity. We need to call your father. He'll know what to do. She turned to me with a cold smile. This isn't over, Nora. Not by a long shot. As they stormed back to the Range Rover, Felicity turned once more. You're nothing but a bitter old woman who couldn't stand seeing her son happy. That's what this is really about. The accusation hung in the air as they drove away, gravel spitting from beneath expensive tires. I remained on my porch, watching until they disappeared around the corner. Only then did I allow myself to tremble slightly, reactions setting in after the confrontation. Not regret, I felt curiously free of that, but the natural response of a body that had held itself in perfect tension for too long. Mrs. Peterson approached cautiously, her corgi sniffing at my garden border. Everything all right, Nora? That looked intense. Just a family disagreement, I said, though we both knew it was far more. In a small town like Auburn Falls, news would spread quickly. The mother of the groom withdrawing financial support the day after the wedding. There would be talk, speculation, sides taken. Well, if you need anything. She let the offer hang, sincere in its simplicity. Thank you, Eleanor. I appreciate that. After she continued her walk, I sank onto my porch swing, suddenly exhausted. The confrontations with Gavin and then with Felicity and Susan had demanded a kind of strength I hadn't exercised in years, perhaps ever. It was like using muscles long dormant, necessary but taxing. My phone pinged with a text from Marta. "Battle stations. Just saw the Chambers Range Rover tear through town like they were fleeing a crime scene." I smiled despite myself. The first wave has retreated. Minimal casualties. Wine still required later. On it. 4 p.m. with reinforcements. Hold the fort, General. I set the phone aside and closed my eyes, letting the gentle rhythm of the porch swing soothe me. The day stretched ahead, still mine to reclaim. But first I needed a moment of stillness to absorb what had happened and what was yet to come. Because Susan was right about one thing. This wasn't over. Not yet. I must have dozed off in the porch swing, lulled by the rhythm and emotional exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, a shadow fell across my face. I opened my eyes to find Tyler, the wedding photographer, standing at the bottom of my porch steps looking uncertain. "Mrs. Delaney? Sorry to disturb you. I knocked, but..." I straightened, brushing a strand of hair back from my face. "Tyler, this is unexpected." He shifted his weight from foot to foot, professional camera bag slung over one shoulder. "I know this is awkward, but I thought you should know. Things are getting complicated." "In what way?" I asked, though I could guess. "I got a call from Mrs. Chambers about an hour ago. They want me to delete certain photos from last night, including, well, the one I gave you." He climbed a step or two, lowering his voice, though no one was nearby. "They're also threatening to withhold my final payment unless I sign a statement saying the incident with your dress was entirely accidental." So they were already in damage control mode, trying to erase the evidence and create a narrative where I was simply an oversensitive mother making trouble. "And what did you tell them?" I asked, curious rather than concerned. The photograph was already in my possession, after all. That I don't alter my professional record for anyone, and that my contract was clear about final payment terms. He gave a slight shrug. "I'm just starting my business. I can't afford to get a reputation for editing reality to suit clients." "That must have been difficult," I acknowledged. "The Chambers family has significant social influence." "They do," he agreed. "But my dad always said integrity costs more up front, but pays better dividends." He hesitated. "There's something else. They're saying you've canceled all the wedding payments, that the post-wedding brunch might not happen. Is that true?" "It is," I confirmed, seeing no reason to dissemble. He nodded slowly. "I thought so. They've asked me to be flexible about my final invoice, too. Reading between the lines, I think they're having some cash flow issues suddenly." I felt a pang of sympathy for the young man caught in the crossfire of family drama. "I'm sorry if my actions have complicated your payment situation." "Don't be," he said with surprising firmness. "Your son and his wife signed a contract with me. Their financial arrangements with you are separate from that." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small portfolio. "Actually, that's partly why I'm here. I wanted to give you these." Inside were a dozen more photographs, candid shots of me throughout the wedding day, helping Gavin with his tie, blinking back tears during the ceremony, straightening flowers in the church, small, meaningful moments that would never make the official wedding album. "I thought you should have them," Tyler said simply, "just in case there's distance between you and your son for a while." The kindness of this near stranger brought an unexpected lump to my throat. "Thank you. These mean more than you know." I have a good relationship with my mom," he said with a small smile. "She would have done the same thing you did if someone treated her that way. Stood up for herself, I mean." As Tyler left, promising to keep me updated on any significant developments, I leafed through the photographs with a bittersweet appreciation. Each captured a moment of genuine emotion. My love for Gavin, my hope for his happiness, my quiet presence throughout the day. None showed what came later: the humiliation, the torn dress, the solitary drive home. I was adding them to my keepsake box when the phone rang again. Expecting Marta, I answered without checking the caller ID. "Nora," a male voice, vaguely familiar. "It's Richard Chambers, Felicity's father." I hadn't spoken directly with Richard throughout the entire wedding planning process. He'd been the distant checkbook, appearing only for the rehearsal, dinner, and ceremony, leaving the details to Susan and Felicity. "Hello, Richard. This is unexpected." "Yes, well," he cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I understand there's been some unpleasantness." An interesting choice of words for his daughter publicly humiliating me. "That's one way to describe it. Look, Nora, I'm a businessman. I believe in direct communication and practical solutions." His tone was brisk, matter of fact. "Susan and Felicity are upset, but I think we can resolve this efficiently." "I'm listening," I said, though I doubted his definition of resolution would match mine. "The facts as I understand them. There was an unfortunate incident with your dress at the reception. Things were said in the heat of the moment that weren't ideal. You left early, understandably upset, and now you've withdrawn financial support that was previously committed." "That's an accurate summary," I agreed, impressed despite myself at his clarity compared to the emotional obfuscation of Susan and Felicity. "Right, so here's what I propose. I'll cover the remaining costs, the venue balance, caterers, this preservation thing Felicity wants. In exchange, we all agree to move forward civilly, for Gavin's sake." The offer was tempting in its simplicity. The financial burden would be lifted from Gavin. The wedding festivities would continue uninterrupted. Life would return to its previous pattern, and therein lay the problem. "That's a generous offer, Richard," I said carefully, "but it doesn't address the underlying issue." "Which is?" "Respect," I said simply. "Or rather, the lack of it. Paying the bills without addressing how your daughter and wife have consistently treated me only reinforces the dynamic that led to last night." There was a long pause. "I see." Another pause. "Felicity mentioned you might want some kind of formal apology. What I want is genuine acknowledgement that what happened wasn't acceptable. Not just last night, but the pattern of behavior leading up to it." I took a breath. "And I want Gavin to understand why I couldn't simply continue as before." Richard sighed heavily. "Nora, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Susan and Felicity are, well, they have strong personalities. Getting them to admit fault isn't my specialty, but I can solve the money problem." "The money was never the problem, Richard. It was just the only leverage I had to be heard." Another lengthy silence. "You know," he said finally, his tone different. "I always wondered why Gavin's father wasn't in the picture." The apparent non sequitur caught me off guard. "James died when Gavin was 8. Heart attack." "I know that part. What I meant was, a woman like you, smart, capable, attractive even now." He cleared his throat. "I assumed there'd been other men after your husband died, but there weren't, were there?" "No," I said, uncertain where this was leading. Raising Gavin and building my business took all my energy. And then, it just never happened. "That's what I figured," Richard said, and there was something like genuine respect in his voice. "You poured everything into your son, and now you're being pushed aside." The simple acknowledgement, from the quarter I least expected, made my eyes sting. "Susan was the same with our girls," he continued, surprising me further. "Devoted, singular in focus. The difference is, she expects things in return. Acknowledgement, status by association, living through their achievements." I heard ice clink in a glass. "She'd never admit it, but she's jealous of you." "Jealous?" I almost laughed. "Of what?" "Your independence, your quiet dignity, the fact that Gavin actually calls you without being prompted." Another clink of ice. "The ladies in my family measure worth by appearances. You measure it differently. It unsettles them." I absorbed this unexpected insight, trying to reconcile it with the cold, dismissive Susan I knew. "I can't make them apologize and mean it," Richard said after a moment. "But I can acknowledge, man to woman, that you deserved better than what happened last night. And I can tell you that withdrawing your financial support was probably the only thing that would ever get their attention." It wasn't an apology on behalf of his family. It wasn't even a solution. But it was something I hadn't expected. Recognition. "Thank you for that," I said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. They're still on the warpath, and Gavin's caught in the middle, poor kid." "He's not a kid," I reminded him gently. "He's a grown man who made his choice when he stood silent last night." "Fair enough," Richard conceded. "Still, anything I can do to smooth this over, for all our sakes?" I considered the question seriously. "You could encourage Felicity to reflect on why she felt the need to humiliate me. And you could remind Gavin that respect isn't optional in family relationships." "I'll try," he said, though his tone suggested limited confidence in the outcome. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry you've been treated this way. It reflects poorly on all of us." After we hung up, I sat quietly, processing the unexpected conversation. Of all the reactions I'd anticipated to my financial stand, genuine understanding from Richard Chambers hadn't made the list. The afternoon light was fading to early evening gold when Marta's Jeep pulled into my driveway, right on time for our promised wine and debriefing. As she emerged with a bottle in each hand, I felt a surge of gratitude for friendship that required no financial transaction, no social positioning, no perfect facade. Just the steady presence of someone who saw me clearly and valued what she saw. Whatever came next with Gavin and Felicity, I wasn't alone, and perhaps that was the most important realization of all. Marta and I sat on my back porch as twilight descended, the wine mellowing our conversation as crickets began their evening chorus. I'd recounted the day's confrontations with Gavin, with Felicity and Susan, and finally the unexpected call from Richard. So Papa Chambers actually showed a glimmer of humanity, Marta mused, refilling our glasses. Wonders never cease. It surprised me too, I admitted, though he was still primarily concerned with solving the immediate financial problem, not addressing the real issue. "Men," Marta snorted, always looking for the quickest fix. "But still, at least he acknowledged you deserved better." She leaned back in her chair, studying me in the gathering dusk. "So what happens now?" "With Gavin, I mean." I traced the rim of my wine glass, considering. "I don't know. That's up to him, I think." "And if he chooses Felicity's side?" Marta asked gently. "If he really does stay away, like she threatened?" The possibility sat heavy in my chest, but no longer crushing. "Then I'll have to accept that too. I can't control his choices, only my own. Look at you, Marta said with quiet admiration. 24 hours ago, you were sitting at that wedding, taking whatever scraps of inclusion they offered. Now you're Nora Delaney, woman of steel. I smiled at the exaggeration. Hardly steel, just clear-eyed finally. Well, I'll drink to clear eyes. She raised her glass in a toast. And to dresses that, when torn, reveal a backbone underneath. We clinked glasses, the sound bright in the peaceful evening. After Marta left, promising to check on me tomorrow, I found myself drawn to my sewing room, where the torn dress still lay on my work table. I switched on the lamp and examined the damage in the warm light. The tear was substantial, running from waist to hip through the delicate ivory lace. Irreparable, at least in its original form. A seamstress knows when restoration is possible and when transformation is required instead. Carefully, I began to deconstruct the dress, separating the torn lace from the underlying fabric. As my hands worked, arthritis slowing but not stopping the practiced movements, I found myself thinking about the fabric of relationships, how they too can be torn beyond conventional repair, requiring a new pattern altogether. I was so absorbed in my work that the knock at my front door startled me. The clock showed just past 9, not terribly late, but unexpected for a social call. I set aside my scissors and went to answer, wondering if Marta had forgotten something. Instead, Gavin stood on my porch, looking disheveled and exhausted. His eyes were rimmed with red, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of a day I could only imagine. "Mom," he said simply. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside to let him pass, noting the absence of Felicity or his in-laws. He entered the living room and stood awkwardly, as if suddenly unsure of his place in this familiar space. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, remembering all the times I'd comforted his childhood hurts with a warm mug and patient listening. "No, thanks." He sank onto the couch, rubbing his face with both hands. "It's been the day from hell, basically." I sat in my armchair across from him, waiting. This was his conversation to begin. "The venue let us reschedule the brunch as a lunch instead," he said finally. "Smaller space, scaled-back menu. The Chambers covered it." He looked up at me. "Along with the honeymoon, though we're going to the Outer Banks now instead of Italy. Felicity's not happy about that." "I imagine not," I said neutrally. "They wanted me to come over here and convince you to change your mind about the payments," he continued. "Susan had this whole script prepared about family unity and how you were ruining everything." He gave a humorless laugh. "They were pretty shocked when I refused." This was unexpected. "You refused?" "Yeah." He met my eyes directly. "Because they're wrong and you're right." The simple admission hung in the air between us, healing and painful at once. "I saw the photograph," he continued. "The one Tyler took. And even without that, I knew, Mom. I knew when it happened that Felicity did it on purpose. I could see it in her face. And I just stood there." "Why?" I asked softly, the question that had lingered since that moment at the reception. He shook his head, eyes downcast. "Because it was easier not to make a scene. Because I didn't want to deal with Felicity's anger on our wedding night. Because ... His voice broke slightly. "Because I've been choosing the path of least resistance for 2 years, and last night was just one more time." I waited, giving him space to continue. "When Felicity and Susan came back from your house this morning, they were furious, ranting about how unreasonable and vindictive you were being. But then Richard pulled me aside and asked what actually happened at the reception. So I told him everything. The deliberate tear, the comments about your dress, the way they've treated you throughout the entire engagement. He swallowed hard. The way I've let them treat you. That must have been difficult, I acknowledged. It was the easiest hard thing I've ever done, he said with a sad smile, like finally setting down a weight I'd been carrying for years. And how did Richard respond? He was quietly angry, not like Felicity and Susan, all drama and scenes, but a cold, controlled anger I've never seen from him before. Gavin rubbed the back of his neck. He told them they'd created this situation themselves, and they could either acknowledge it or deal with the consequences. I see. This aligned with the glimpse I'd gotten of Richard's perspective during our call. The thing is, Gavin continued hesitantly, I think deep down, Felicity knows what she did was wrong, but she's never had to face consequences before. Neither of us has, really. You've always been there to smooth things over, to forgive without requiring accountability. The observation struck me with its accuracy. I had been teaching people how to treat me for years, showing them that my love and support came without conditions, without requirement, for basic respect. Anyway, Gavin sighed. The honeymoon's been downgraded. The post-wedding brunch is now a lunch, and Felicity's dress preservation appointment has been cancelled. Small consequences in the grand scheme of things. And between you and Felicity, I asked carefully, where does this leave your marriage, one day in? He looked out the window at the darkened garden, considering. Honestly, in a healthier place than where it started. She's furious right now, but beneath that, I think there's a realization that something has to change. He turned back to me. I told her I won't be complicit in disrespecting you anymore, that you deserve better from both of us. And she accepted this. Not happily, he admitted. But when the alternative I presented was returning to counseling before the honeymoon, she agreed we need to reassess some things. I reached across the space between us and took his hand. I'm proud of you, Gavin. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, he agreed, squeezing my hand. But it was necessary. I just wish I'd done it before. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the torn dress, the cancelled payments, the day of confrontations. We can't change what came before, I said gently. We can only move forward differently. I'd like that, he said, and for the first time that day, his smile reached his eyes. And I'd like to start by saying, I'm sorry, Mom. Truly sorry for standing silent when Felicity tore your dress, for all the times I've let you be pushed to the margins, for taking your love and support for granted. The apology washed over me, not erasing the hurt, but beginning the necessary mending. Thank you, I said simply. That means more than you know. We talked for another hour, more openly than we had in years, about his relationship with Felicity, about the future they envisioned, about the changes they both needed to make, about my life too, my dreams beyond being his mother, my friendships, my plans for the years ahead. When he finally rose to leave, something had shifted between us. Not a complete transformation that would take time and continued effort from both of us, but a recalibration, a new pattern beginning to take shape. Will you come to the lunch tomorrow? He asked at the door. It won't be the extravaganza originally planned, but... I'd like that, I said. On one condition. Name it. That I'm seated at the family table, not tucked away in a corner, not at the edges, but where I belong as your mother. Front and center, he promised. I'll make sure of it myself. After he left, I returned to my sewing room and the disassembled dress. Looking at the pieces, the torn lace carefully removed, the underlying fabric now free of its damaged overlay, I was struck by a new vision of what these materials could become. Not a restoration of what was, but a transformation into something new. Perhaps a christening gown for a future grandchild, or a series of sachets and keepsakes, preserving the precious fabric in a different form. The possibilities were numerous once I stopped trying to recreate the original. Like my relationship with Gavin, like my sense of self, like the quiet, dignified woman who had walked out of a wedding reception with her head held high, finally unwilling to accept less than she deserved. I gathered the fabric pieces and placed them in my special project basket. There was no rush to decide their fate tonight. Tomorrow would bring the scaled-back lunch, the first test of these newly established boundaries. Perhaps more confrontations, perhaps tentative steps toward healing. But for now, I had reclaimed something precious. Not just my financial leverage or my son's attention, or even the respect I deserved. I had reclaimed myself. And like the finest fabrics I'd worked with throughout my career, that self was stronger at the torn places, more valuable for having been tested, and beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with outward appearances. I switched off the sewing room light and prepared for bed, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Not as a background figure in someone else's story, but as the heroine of my own.